You're listening to Tony Graham here on Binjang 91.5, and it's time for Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Good morning, Matthew.
Yeah, good morning, Tony. Thanks for chatting to me again on Tech Talk.
It's always a great thing to do in the morning. Now, satellites. Do you think they might be the answer to Australia's bushfire problems?
Yeah, I think there's probably a pretty good chance, Tony, that maybe not the complete answer, but certainly a major part of the solution. Because you can imagine a system that could detect any bushfire in Australia within minutes. And if you could do that, you could stop these bushfires before they get completely out of hand. And we've all seen footage of bushfires that are raging, and then we see these planes come across and drop tons and tons of water, and it looks like it makes no difference at all. But imagine if you could get to those fires when they're only in their infancy. And one particular company, it's a Queensland-based company called Fireball, has announced the first purpose-built satellite for fire detection in Australia. It's part of a constellation of 24 satellites that they're going to launch over the next year or so to be able to get to that point where they think they can detect a bushfire within 1 minute of ignition, which sounds quite incredible. At the moment, the firefighters rely on triple O calls, but you can imagine the middle of the night, if there's a lightning strike somewhere, by the next morning when people notice that can already have been burning for hours and hours. But if you could just get those ones early, get some water on it or get some fire retardant on it as quick as possible, then we might be able to have a bit of a solution. This particular company, Fireball, has actually been working in California already, doing exactly the same thing in California. Just the fact they haven't got enough satellites up yet means that they're probably not getting onto it within a minute, but they're still getting early detection. So again, technology, we've got a whole range of things happening with climate change. Certainly fires, large fires will be a part of our future going forward with climate change. But if we can start to use some technology to address the problems, then maybe we'll be able to battle off things like bushfires. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, well, it certainly is. I think that could be the answer to a lot of our problems. And the last big bushfire that we had, in fact, which was at Mount Gosper, had they been able to detect that earlier and firebomb it, they would have probably stopped that.
Yeah, I think that's the case with any of these major bushfires. If we could pick up the bushfire starting earlier, again, when there's a lightning strike or if someone carelessly tosses a match or a smoke, then if you can get it when it's small, and the technology they're using here was first developed to spot supernovae in distant galaxies. And what they found was that they were trying to look at ways to look at bushfires from a satellite without seeing all the other imagery that might come through. And they found that if you snapped images in the 3.99 micron band, that wavelength emits light, but not all the background noise. So satellites are basically tuned to that 3.9 micron band to try and pick up those bushfires. So some pretty heavy technology is going into it. Professor Pennypacker from the University of California has developed this technology based on the work that he was doing trying to work on distant galaxies. So it's great to see that work we see looking at into space can also be applied here on Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure a lot of people will be very pleased about that technology. Now, The next question is, I think, really comparing apples to oranges, really, but it's about a tiny EV, so-called beating Tesla as the best-selling EV in the world so far this year. Well, you know, that's sort of comparing going back in the day selling Holdens versus Minis, I think.
Yeah, quite possibly. But there is so much interest in EVs around the world that any numbers are keenly talked about. So Tesla's gone well this year. Their Model 3 has had pretty impressive numbers. 35,000 have been sold in the 2 completed months for this year so far. So that's pretty good. But China-based Wuling sold 56,000 of their mini EVs in the first 2 months. So they are officially the number one selling EV in the world. You are right, they are ever so slightly different cars. The Wuling sells in China for 28,800 yuan, or let's just say about $5,700 in Aussie terms. They get 170 kilometres per charge, which is fine for just a town runaround, so that's fine. Top speed of 100 kilometres an hour, so probably not that good on our open roads around here. Only weighs 660 kilograms, and the manufacturer claims it can seat 4 people, but I think they'd want to be small people. I don't think it would seat 4 large adults. Obviously, the Model 3 Tesla is a little bit different to that. $66,000 for the base model in Aussie terms, a range of over 400 kilometres, 5 people comfortably seated, and it's a tonne heavier at 1,600 kilograms with a top speed of 225 kilometres an hour. But the great part about this is that it's just that whole progression of EVs across the world. So this particular EV was a joint venture between General Motors and Hongguan in China, only being sold in China at this stage, but if their numbers keep going like this, they might continue to ramp up their production, and I can see these EVs being incredibly useful in any other congested cities around the world.
How many wheels has it got, Malcolm? Malcolm.
So four wheels on this particular one, so it's not as small as some of the 3-wheel ones you might have seen. So this one's got 4 wheels, but it is very small. When you see a picture of it, it actually looks skinny and tall. And again, they've been able to make it tall to help fit people in a bit easier, but with the low centre of gravity with the batteries down low, they can make it a bit taller and still have it relatively safe.
Mm. Well, I have to say, Matthew, it's a very light vehicle, isn't it?
It's very light, yeah. And you can imagine you put 4 heavy adults in there, it's getting to the stage where it almost doubles the weight of the overall package that's being driven along. So I'm sure the number of people you have in there would have an impact on its range and just on its general performance.
Yeah, I wonder how the safety of the vehicle goes as well. You know, weighing 600 kilograms is pretty light.
Yeah, it is. So I'm sure it will pass all the regulatory requirements for safety at a minimum.
Yes, in China.
In China, that's right.
Now, who do you reckon's going to win the battle to put satellite internet in our backyards?
There's some pretty big companies battling it out there at the moment, and some pretty big individuals. You've got Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, they're battling it out, and they're all working on this concept of putting up low Earth orbit satellites. We know about geostationary satellites in Australia, 35,786 kilometres above the Earth. It creates some latency which makes the experience not ideal. But when you start to go to low Earth orbit and you start to talk about a couple of 100 kilometres above the Earth, you start to get rid of that latency and you start to get pretty good performance. So the Starlink service at the moment is currently in beta testing. There's about 10,000 people that are actually testing the Starlink service. So there's already a number of satellites, I think a couple of 100 at the moment, satellites up there. And some of these beta testers are getting download speeds of 120 megabits per second, which is obviously pretty impressive. That's with testing going on in the US, in Canada and the UK. Of course, the real challenge for Starlink and other companies is what will happen when you don't have 10,000 people using it, but you have a few million or 10 million or 100 million people using it across the world. Obviously, that speed that you're getting is going to be a function of how many people are actually using it. So that's one that's out there working at the moment. I'd say Amazon, Jeff Bezos' company, is there working on an alternative service as well. And then you've got a few other companies that are out there working a while on this particular concept. So it's going to be pretty crowded up there. You've got Telesat, they've been around for a while. You've got OneWeb. OneWeb are getting into some things like some telecommunications with airplanes as well. So we know that space is pretty big, but we also know that it's getting a bit crowded up there. And one of the reasons they want so many satellites up there is because the estimations are that space junk, including their own space junk, sometimes will cause a few collisions and knock a satellite out of the sky from time to time. So having lots of redundancy in space is pretty important for them. The pricing for Starlink is not too bad. $499 you pay up front, $499, but then you're just paying $99 a month for the service. Now that's in the US at the moment, so that's fairly comparable to what you might pay for an NBN connection, for example.
Yeah, it's a bit dearer for probably something not quite as good.
Yeah. Having said that, if you were out of an area where you couldn't get NBN and you didn't have great mobile phone reception, you would think that was pretty cheap.
I think so, yes. And you've been listening to Matthew Dickerson here with Tech Talk, and I'm Tony Graham. Stick around this afternoon because we have another talk, and it'll go for about the same time on Binjang 91.5.
All right, thanks, Tony. Chat to you this afternoon.
Thanks, Matthew.